Are you raising your kids or influencing the younger humans in your lives to be confident communicators? For better or worse, technology has changed the way we communicate. As younger generations continue to enter the workforce, it's important that they be prepared to confidently and effectively communicate with others. This week, I'm talking with Tim Newman, an educator who has specialized in sport marketing, public relations, leadership, and social media. Here, Tim and I talk about common communication challenges in the workplace. We then focus our attention on preparing future generations to communicate by providing them with the appropriate resources and opportunities to build their skills. Thank you so much, as always, for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Meninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. Welcome, Tim. It is a pleasure to have you here today, and I would love to start by inviting you to introduce yourself.
First, Kim, thank you for inviting me to join you and share information, with the Imposter Syndrome Files community. It's great what you're doing, and as I've listened to some of your episodes, you're providing great value to the rest of your community. So I hope they appreciate that. A little bit about me: I'm a kind of a what you see is what you get person who has imposter syndrome at times, just like everybody else. I'm a recovering college professor. My last semester was just this past fall, and now I'm helping people become more confident and better communicators. Our young professionals today have such trouble getting over their communication fears, and I think a lot of that stems from the imposter syndrome and worried about what everybody else is thinking about them and what they're thinking about their thoughts and what they're wearing today and what they're going to wear next week and all these other things that from at least from my perspective, I think we put on ourselves and need to just kind of let that go and lean into who we are and go out and be successful.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And before we go down that path in more detail, I wanted to ask you, what were you teaching? And is it related to communication or?
Well, that's a really good question. My background is in sport marketing and public relations. And, part of what I found, as I've grown as a professional is if we can communicate, what I do is not rocket science. It's basically relationships. If you can build relationships and know your product and know the services that you're trying to sell, you're going to be fine. It's not rocket science. But part of the problem is building those relationships. And as I've gone through my career from the teaching perspective, what I found was that I had to get better at teaching these soft skills because they're not taught, especially when you get to the college level, they haven't been taught in public school or private school or home school, wherever they matriculated from. So they come to us in college or university setting, and they don't know how to talk. They don't know how to present. They don't know how to actually put together a coherent presentation of information to sell or whatever the topic is. And so as my career progressed, I found myself focusing more on teaching those types of skills. And then when COVID hit and we went all online and then came back, it was like, oh my goodness, what happened? What little I thought that they had before, they don't even have that anymore. So it was almost like starting from scratch, and teach and helping them understand the importance of communication, understand the importance of some of the things that we have to do to be effective and confident communicators.
You're so right about having to teach that because I think, certain majors or certain areas of study perhaps have communication a little bit more woven into it. But in general, we get so laser focused on whatever the subject is that we're studying, right? And we miss out on these fundamentals.
Yeah. And it's funny as I've done a little bit more research and with my podcast and talking to other podcast hosts like yourself, there's a ton of people out there, especially in the STEM field, that this really does affect, because the whole idea of science and technology and engineering, they are so data driven and so finite that they really have trouble in communicating to people outside of those fields, right? And again, you have to take those concepts and be able to sell that outside of those fields to other people, and it's really, they're dealing with some of the same things that everybody else deals with on just a different level, and it goes across the board.
You're absolutely right too about, I think about communication. It has so many different flavors to it, for lack of a better term, right?
Yeah,
We're talking about
yeah.
presenting content to somebody, and that feels a little bit more formal. And maybe if you are in a data-driven field, you have to have enough data to substantiate your argument, but you also want to tell a story too, right? Otherwise, you're going to
Exactly.
lose your audience, especially those that aren't as connected. And so and then you've got your less formal form of communication, right? And you mentioned building relationships, which is such an important part of any job. And I think nowadays, especially if you don't work in the same office with people, or we're relying on technology so much, it's like that, it's like an art that we've lost.
Exactly. And I'm glad you brought that up, because when I talk about communication and helping people become better communicators, I'm looking at it from a holistic perspective. It could be a team meeting, it could be an interview, it could be a networking session, it could be the number of people that have such anxiety of going to a grocery store and talking to people, or all these other different types of communication. You don't have to be on stage, you don't have to be giving a presentation, it could be any types of things. And I think some of the same concepts apply to talking about something in a team meeting, to being in an interview or a networking event, or all these other different types of environments that we have to communicate in across life, both personally and professionally. We struggle, and we have to find ways to be able to overcome that.
Yeah. And it's funny because the two areas that I see as most challenging are certainly the more formal presentation, because of the anxiety and the pressure that comes with that. But small talk
Yes.
is up there too, right? The one you think is kind of, and certainly for certain personality types, for people who are more comfortable socially, it feels obvious. But for a lot of people, small talk, like you said, going to the grocery store, or just, being in an elevator with somebody, that can be incredibly daunting.
Yes. Yes. And, I laugh because um, I grew up in Maryland, spent a lot, my younger years in Maryland, types of things. When I went to get my doctorate down south, and people down south are so friendly, they really are. And I would have to call my wife and say, "Look, I'm inside. I'm getting ready to go get in the car. Please talk to me on the phone, because if somebody stops and talks to me, we're going to be there talking for 3 hours, and I don't have 3 hours to talk to somebody, And so that's so we're talking about the mid '90s at that point, and we're like, oh my gosh, we have to learn how to do that, and this is, for me, 30 years ago, I wasn't in the mode of teaching communication or in the mode of relationship building. Those types of things never crossed my mind. And if I were smart at that point, I probably would have every once in a while taken that time to just interact and talk to people outside or in the grocery store, what have you. I mean, literally, think back to the '90s. I had a bag phone doing this, and how expensive the bag phone was, and that's how we spent our time of carrying a bag phone around a grocery store, so I didn't have to talk to anybody else but my wife, just so I could get grocery shopping done.
So funny. And well, the good news, I would say, is that if it's an area that you want to develop, there's so many opportunities to do it. And the
Yes.
grocery store is a really safe place to practice, right? You're probably never going to see these people again, or at least, most people aren't judging you in the same way that maybe you're being evaluated at work.
Exactly. And that's the key, and that's one of the things I try and tell people. You're in the produce aisle. Ask somebody about the broccoli. If you don't know how if you don't know how a fruit how to tell if a fruit is ripe. What are you going to do? You're just going to buy bad fruit, right? I mean, you have to talk to somebody, whether it's the person standing next to you or the person that works there. You know, baby steps, baby steps, baby steps, and that's when if you start because you take a step back to get better at anything, you have to practice. You have to actually do it because if you don't do it, not only does that anxiety build in you, you don't get better, and it's going to take you longer to get out of that anxiety and longer to improve to get to where you need to be.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that when something feels scary, at least for me, my imagination is a very dark place. The reality is always better than my imagination.
Yeah,
And like you said, the more you avoid it, the scarier it feels. Like the more that looming thing that you can't avoid, right? Like you've been avoiding
mm-hmm.
speaking and now you have to do it. It just feels that much scarier as opposed to just doing the baby steps that you're talking about.
Yeah,
And then over time, it's just like a muscle, right? Just like any muscle.
exactly. Exactly. And the other thing I think about is the more you let it build up, the more you're going to spit something out, and then people are really going to look at you and say, "Where did that come from?" you know.
That's right. And so, what do you think is kind of another I don't want to say elementary, but I'm thinking like early step for people who are maybe struggling with more of those social interactions or even just connecting with people outside of a more formal presentation? Like, is there anything else that you suggest people try or think about?
Well, you know, I always think that starting with the informal piece is always the way to go, but even still, that you're still avoiding the things that we have to do from a professional perspective,
Mm,
right? And so we can't do that. So maybe it's going to a networking event, right? Or maybe it's having a conversation with a teammate or a colleague and say, okay, I know we have this big presentation coming up or this meeting coming up. Can you help walk me through what we're going to talk about in our portion where I'm supposed to give this part of the presentation? Can you guide me on this, or can you watch me? Can you help me? And again, now we're reaching into another level where, especially from an introvert perspective, right? We're putting ourselves out there. That's one. And now number two, we have to ask somebody else to help us.
mm,
And as soon as we ask somebody else to help us, now we're saying, okay, now they know how awful I am, and that I'm not good enough to be able to do this. And oh my gosh, they're going to go run around and tell everybody that I really shouldn't be in this job and I shouldn't be in this position. So now we've got to overcome two hurdles, and another thing to just get over it. That number one, that we were hired for a reason.
mm.
The company organization didn't hire us to fail. They didn't hire us because they needed somebody to make fun of. They didn't hire us to spend money, right? They hired us because we brought value. We had the knowledge, the skills, the abilities to fulfill a role that they needed fulfilled.
Yes.
And that's what our responsibilities are. So accept it, and if we need help, ask for that help. If we, whatever that is, that's just part of growing. But it's so hard to get to that point.
You're right. And I always try to say that to people too. You already passed the interview, right? You wouldn't be here if you hadn't. But to your point about asking for help, I also think it might sound counterintuitive because it feels like a vulnerable position to take, but asking for help in the way that you're describing is actually a really good influence strategy to our a relationship building strategy. Because if you go to another person and you say, hey, you know what, I'd really like your thoughts on this before I present it, or, I'd love to get your feedback or your take, you're bringing somebody into the boat with you, so to speak. And so now they feel invested in your message. They are now an ally in the room with you. When you get in there, you're going to feel more confident because you feel like you've already test driven what you're saying and somebody else is on board. And so it might feel uncomfortable at first, but it's a great way to actually overcome discomfort in the long run.
Exactly. And at least, and I'm just going to say from my own personal perspective, for me, um, I don't ask for help. I don't. It's just not something. It's not something that Tim does. There's no way this is going to happen. Um, and no, don't ask for help. Don't show emotion. I laugh, but that's about it. And one of the things that I personally have had to overcome as I've been taking this journey is I tell everybody else to step outside their comfort zone.
Mm.
They're seeing me do this, right? And I put out a piece a few weeks ago of just about number one asking for help because I don't ask for help at all. And my business coach and person who's helped me do some other things, she said, I will only work with you if I tell you to do something and you do it. And I said, okay, I'm a coachable person. You tell me to do something, I'll do it. And we had a conversation. She said, this is what I want you to do. And silent. And she said, are you going to do it? I said, yeah, I'll do it. And part of that was me having to ask for help.
Oh.
And so it obviously it turned out great, but it's also, I think it's important for people to see people with experience or people that that other people are going through the same things that they are. They're not alone. Mm-hmm. They're truly not alone. I think everybody goes through these stages at some point in their life and some point in their career. And to see other people going through those steps, say, okay, you know what? If they can do it, I can do it.
Yes. Yes, you're so right. Because I was just having this conversation recently too, where there is this perception that for people who achieve a certain level of success, whatever that looks like, that it was because they had some inherent talents or something that I don't have, right? Because the process is never transparent. I don't see you struggle on your path to get there. I don't hear you, asking for advice and seeking mentorship. I just assume that you skyrocketed there on your own, right? And then so asking for help obviously brings you support, but it also models it for other people and shows them, like you said, this is part of the journey. We all have to get there somehow, right? It's not like we wake up one day and we've achieved whatever it is that we've set out to achieve.
Exactly. It's, and I had a conversation this morning, and the person I was talking to said, even CEOs of Fortune 500 companies struggle with this. Mm. They struggle with, they're seen as these leaders, these people that have it all together. But if they're supposed to give a talk in front of their employees, they claim up. They don't know how to do it because of, and it comes back to, what if they find out that I'm not who they think that I am, right? Or I mess up, or I, and then I'm being judged. And so understand, again, everybody goes through this.
Yeah. And the more you worry about that, right, the more likely you are to perform at a lower level than you want to. So yeah. And I'm curious to get your take. And technology, right, has changed a lot. And I think about my own kids. When I was a kid, we had to call, if I wanted to play with a friend, I had to call, talk to their parents. I had to learn how to communicate with other adults. I had to speak in full sentences. And nowadays I have, 2 boys that are 9 and 14, and they're texting in acronyms that I don't even understand.
I don't understand. Right.
They don't speak full sentences. And I think, like, how are they, my husband and I were both thinking, how are they going to go out into the world and communicate as professionals? And so, especially as a college professor, I wonder, how do you see people transitioning from that very informal, don't really have to talk to anybody but themselves, into the workplace?
It's hard. I mean, it's all kidding aside. It's hard, and I don't know from a societal perspective that we're doing these kids any favors. I really don't, because we allow it to continue, and we allow it to happen. One of the things I do is I run golf tournaments, and this past weekend we had a big tournament, and I was talking to a business leader who's one of our members, and he was talking about the whole idea of writing. And I said, well, number one, they don't know how to write. They don't know how to write a business plan. They don't know how to write an email to a client. They don't know how to write, a sales email. And I said, okay, that's just one aspect of it. Not only do they not know how to write, they don't know how to write. They don't know how to actually write. Okay, because we don't write anymore. We type everything, and I think that not actually writing has hurt our language skills, our regular writing skills, our regular speaking skills, and now we go to the text message where, um, you know, what are some abbreviations that we see in text? TY, thank you. Just why can't you just type out thank you? Um, never mind is whatever it is. So we've shortened everything up, and then when it comes time to, from a college student perspective, to write a paper or to write an email, and one of the things I used to have my students do was do informational interviews
Mhm.
with professionals, because I think that's something key for them to do, to get out and, number one, to network, number two, to talk to people who are doing the things that they may want to do or not want to do, and find out what it's like. And one of the things that they have to do is they actually have to write an email, and I've got to see the email, and they're graded on that.
That's
And they struggle so much with writing a professional email, because what I found is most professionals are very willing to help if you reach out to them, if you're professional, and you're specific with what you need and what value you can also bring to them, right? And so, I mean, some of the examples of emails I would get were just god awful, and they would say, "Well, I can't get anybody to help me," and I would have to sit down with them and say, "This is why. This is why they're not willing to help, because you're not presenting yourself in a professional manner. They're not going to bring you in and give you an hour of their time if you can't spend 20 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever it's going to take you to write a professional email." And so the whole idea of writing and communication from that written perspective is bad. And then you take it on another level, talking on the phone. Everybody has phones. I mean, my grandkids won't get phones until they're much older, but right, everybody has a phone. Very few people use it as a phone.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
And it would drive me nuts, and I know I would say it at least 2 or 3 times a week. You have a phone, open it up, dial the number, and call them. I'm begging you. Have a conversation. Think about this from another perspective. How long does it take to go back and forth on 15 different emails back and forth to come to a conclusion on something? I would much rather pick up the phone, have a 2-minute conversation, all the questions are asked and answered, and then we move forward. That's a problem. I mean, and I think all that comes from the lack of confidence in actually communicating with people or talking to somebody.
Oh, I could not agree more. I think that the technology allows us to avoid what we might perceive as an uncomfortable conversation because we haven't practiced, right? If you've grown up with the phone, right? And so you haven't been doing the kinds of things that we've been talking about, picking up the phone, talking to other people, then it's just not something that's a comfort zone for you. And
Right.
then you go through, like you said, the back and forth on these emails. In my mind, unless the information is crystal clear, uncontroversial, not likely to trigger any emotions, you don't send it in an email.
Right. You don't.
uh,
Exactly.
That's like a really good way of presenting very basic facts. But other than that, having the conversation is not only a great forum for practicing your communication skills, but that's how you build trust. That's how you build relationships with other people. You're not motivated to be respectful, to be thoughtful, to be empathetic when you can't even see a person on the other side of that message.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Is there anything you think parents can be doing better? I say that personally, and then I'm also imagining people listening might also be wondering that.
Okay. I think one of the biggest things that they could do is not give the kids phones until it's age appropriate.
Mm.
and get them off of social media. I think social media. Let me take a step backwards. I don't put all the blame on social media because we've had some of the things that we're talking about now for forever. The
Mhm.
whole idea of low self esteem, low confidence, imposter syndrome, that's been happening for forever. So that is not social media's fault.
Mm.
However, social media has magnified that exponentially because we are so worried about somebody who we don't know is worried about what color shirt that we've got on, or we've said something, or we've liked some other person's, post or what have you, that doesn't make any difference anyway. And so I think part of it is don't give them phones until it's age appropriate, and keep them off of social media because
Mm.
it's become what it's done to especially adolescents and their psyche, the depression rates, the whole idea of suicide rates and those types of things. I'm saying it's directly related to social media use and the abuse and the bullying that goes on with that can't be stopped and can't really be controlled. um,
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think about it too. If you're constantly being presented with information about what you're missing, right?
mhm.
When we were kids, if we weren't invited to a party, there weren't a million pictures of
Right.
what what we missed out online. And then to your point, that as humans, we are already inclined to compare ourselves to other people. And then when you've got it in your face all of the time, you're never going to be able to resist that. And so to be able to build your own sense of self outside of those external forces and judgments is so important.
But I think something that they can do that's going to empower kids is make them talk to other people.
Mm.
So obviously, I come from education. My wife was an educator as well, and she and I really disagreed on this at the beginning. I told my kids, and they're grown now. I said, if you have a problem in school, if you have a problem with a teacher, don't come to me. I want you to go and address it with the teacher. And this was in first grade. I said, I want you to go and address it with the teacher. And if you don't feel like you've been heard or you don't like the outcome, then you come to me. But don't you have to learn to advocate for yourself and learn how to deal with different people with different personalities at different levels to to be able to grow. And what you're going to find is, if you do that, you're going to get a much better response than if I come in and start asking questions.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great practice. I think that's something that all parents should really think about. Our school system is pretty good. Once my son got into middle school-ish, but certainly in high school now, the teachers pretty much require that the kids be the one to
That's
communicate with
awesome.
them,
Mhm.
which is great, because it's just too easy to say, "Hey, mom, dad, would you handle this for me?" Right? It's a really great. You talked about advocacy. I think it's a really great way to build that kind of self-advocacy at a young age.
But you would be surprised at the number of times parents would call me or email me from the college professor perspective. Yeah. And I'd politely tell them that number one, legally, I can't talk about your son or daughter.
They're
And,
adults.
and number two, you're not doing them any favors. They've got to learn how to do this because I hope to God you're not going to a job interview, right? But if they get passed over promotion, are you going to call their boss? Their annual evaluation, they got 2 points less than you thought that they deserved. What, how are you going to handle this,
When
right?
does it end? No, it's really true. And so that's something that that's a great tip for parents to really think about as early as possible.
Mhm.
And you said, I think, a really good point of like they can start if they need help, we can be there to step in,
Absolutely.
but to take the first step is really important. And it really is mind blowing when I think about you saying parents reaching out in college. I don't think my mom would have even known who to contact.
Right, right, right.
There's just no way she didn't even have the information. It's amazing that that's how much parenting has evolved to be so overly involved.
Yeah, you know, and so, but like I said, my last semester was in this past fall, and in December, the last email that I got from a parent, they were having some issues, and they moved, and they moved to Arizona, I think it was, and their son had to go home, and she emailed me about his assignments, and I said, "Ma'am, I get it, however, I can't talk about it. All you have to do is tell him to email me, and we can work it out." And lo and behold, he emails me, we get it worked out, and then the mother sends me an email, "Thank you so much. I didn't think about it from that perspective." And so again, it's we've developed these helicopter parents, and they don't actually think about what they're doing, or how they're not actually helping their kids. And I think that, again, that all comes back to the whole idea of technology, because my guess is where your kids are right now. I mean, obviously they're in school, right? Unless you're on a snow day. I don't know if you're in a snow place.
No snow day here. Yeah.
Okay, but they're in school, or if something's not right, you could find them. You could pick up your phone and you could find them in about 10 or 15 seconds, right? And that's our mentality. I mean, talk about phones as kids. I had a rotary phone. We had rotary phones,
Yes.
right? And so you talk about Generation X. Parents didn't know they had commercials. Where are your kids? You know where your kids are. That was us, right? And now if they're 15 feet away, we get upset. And so I think there's got to be a happy medium in there somewhere, right?
Right. Well, it is funny to think about. I remember those commercials. Do you know where your children?
Yeah.
No, this is really helpful, Tim. I think you've given some really great tips for us as professionals, but also as parents. And I really feel like the sooner we start this process, the easier it is. And so I certainly think of it as, the parent of children that are, I've got one who's a freshman in high school. He's going to be going off to college before I know it. And so,
yes.
I really appreciate the insights and the work that you're doing. For others who want more of you and your work, where can they find you?
I laugh at that because not many people want more of that. But anyway, you can find me at timnewmanspeaks.com. Loads of free resources to help you become better, more confident speakers. There's also, you can sign up and register for the Forum for Public Speaking. And basically that's a step-by-step process to help you build that confidence and to become that better, more confident speaker.
Perfect. Well, I'll make sure that those links are in the show notes. And thanks again for being here. I really appreciate it, Tim.
Kim, thanks so much. I appreciate it. Take care.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.